During the uncharacteristically warm springtime of the year of our Lord 1899, on a modestly sized, somewhat ramshackle farm in the Gloucestershire countryside, a litter of pigs was born to a Mr. and Mrs. Stanley. The Stanleys had been farming this particular corner of Gloucestershire, on the outskirts of the curiously named hamlet of Rumplesnudgeon, for nearly 3 centuries. However, the degree of competency to which the farming had been carried out had slipped when the rather ironically named Abel Stanley had inherited his late father's farm. Abel, a portly man of about 6 feet and no inches, balding and near-sighted, had never really had any interest in farming at all. He'd longed for a lavish life in London, of fine dining and exorbitantly priced alcohols, to be a man of society, and to explore the far-flung corners of the world, on his father's money, naturally. This was not to be, for during the 5th cholera epidemic beginning 1883, Abel's father was struck down, and with no other male heirs, Abel became the proprietor of Stanley Farm. Now to address the aforementioned litter of pigs. The Stanleys had done their best, which was not very good at all, to keep the farm productive over the years. Cabbage, carrot, and the humble potato had once flowed from this patch of land to greengrocers across the county. But many failed harvests had led to Abel giving up on growing produce altogether and focusing on what he found easiest, breeding pigs for slaughter. To his untrained eye, the pigs cared little about the quality of their surroundings, seemingly happy enough to eat and lounge in the mud. Less time tending to his source of income meant more time spending said income on what he enjoyed most, a good bottle or 3 of cheap plonk. Yes, when the rooster crowed at dawn each day, Abel Stanley was more likely to be found slumped over the kitchen table with a sore head than, as all of his peers in the farming community were doing, tending to their land, flocks and herds. But that spring, in the dirtiest of pens, with dilapidated fencing and little in the way of comfortable shelter, something happened that would prove to be of significant historical importance. His prize sow, Mabel, birthed a very special litter, and the principal character of our story, dear reader, came to be. Scientists have deliberated for over 100 years now as to what exactly causes the following phenomenon, but, alas, the only thing that has been settled upon is the name: bipedal, porcine Savantism. You see, there is only one example of this biological anomaly ever occurring, and it happened, as I previously mentioned, on a modestly sized farm in Gloucestershire in the year 1899. Of the 9 piglets born that spring, the Stanleys were expecting a runt. Any pig farmer worth their salt knows to expect at least one little piggy to be smaller, weaker, and, as such, rejected by its mother. Yet in the weeks and months that followed the birthing, there was no runt to be found, but something else entirely. Something really rather peculiar. Among the excitable, squealing and grunting pink creatures that occupied the mud pile, rolling around in the filth and fighting for their mother's teat, there sat, and I really do mean sat, upright on its behind, an animal that resembled its siblings only in appearance. The behaviour seemed more reminiscent of a toddler, curious of itself and its surroundings. It appeared, to the bemused Stanleys, deep in thought. That, of course, could not be possible, they thought. A pig is a pig is a pig. It hasn't the self-awareness comparable to a Homo sapien. It simply lives to eat, sleep and frolic, at least for as long as it is small and mobile enough to do so. The humble pig may have been somewhat underestimated in the past, for we now know that among the cloven-hoofed animals, the pig is perhaps the most intelligent. Or to be more specific, has the capacity to learn in the same way that some of the more intelligent breeds of dog do, such as the working border collie, given the appropriate training. But to the Stanleys, whom were not the brightest examples of the human species, pigs were dumb and good for one thing only: meat.
What's it doing, Abe?
asked Mrs. Doris Stanley, herself a rather funny-looking woman, standing at a mere 5'1", with a face permanently flushed, a bulb-like bush of frizzy greying hair atop her head, and, much like her husband, rather portly. "Dunno," Abel responded, "but if it ain't right by morrow, I'll do something about it." The pig stared back at them now, curious at their apparent interest.
It's looking at me funny. Got the devil in it, Abe. I don't like it, not one bit.
"Don't be daft, Doris," Abel scoffed. "It's just a pig. Come on, I wants to get into town. Old Bill Wormsley promised me a jug of that scrumpy he's had brewing in his barn. Right strong stuff it is." And with that, the Stanleys made their way off, soon forgetting all about the curious creature that inhabited the pen. Several days passed. The Stanleys emerged at about midday from Bill Wormsley's farmhouse, unwashed, dishevelled and stinking of homemade cider, though I should stress that this wasn't much different from how most of their days started, save the location. They staggered the 1.5 miles back to the farm, telling themselves that their bed waited, and "pigs just sort of look after themselves," Abel had grumbled when Doris had reminded them that he was, in fact, a farmer and had duties to attend to. Yet, upon reaching the farm, they were met with a disconcerting sight. The front door was wide open. With a sudden burst of nervous energy, Abel picked up his mucky pitchfork from beside the pig pen and barreled through the open door, ready to skewer whatever ne'er-do-well was waiting for him inside. A few tense moments passed.
Abel? You all right?
Doris cried out.
Did they find the stash? They best not have been through my unmentionables. Dirty scoundrels!
There was no answer. Sweat rolling down her round, flushed face, Doris picked up the first solid thing she could see, which happened to be one of Abel's mud-encrusted boots, and crept into the house. But to her surprise, there was no intruder. The house looked much as they had left it, except for one thing. Across the kitchen table was strewn a dozen open books, and Abel, slumped in the chair at the end, looked on in disbelief. "Me pa's books. They ain't taken nothing. They just looked at his books." The books in question had belonged to Abel's father, Frederick Stanley, though they were of little consequence to Abel and had gathered a layer of dust at least a half-inch thick, given that they hadn't left the bookshelf since the passing of the elder Stanley. It wasn't that Abel couldn't read, far from it. His father had placed considerable importance on learning as much as possible about the world beyond the farm, of literature and language. Abel had spent many an evening sat with his father as they read together. However, many moons had passed since, many nights spent in the company of fermented apple or grape, and Abel had discovered that he much preferred them to the contents of any book. "They is for stuffy, learned types who don't know how to have a good time," he had once remarked when asked of the small but impressive personal library. It should be noted that had Abel, a man forever borrowing and stealing coin to pay the barman or bank manager, bothered to inquire of the value of said books, he would have come to realise that he was sat upon a small fortune of first editions, complete encyclopediae rare for the time, and even a signed copy of Dickens' Great Expectations, a gift to Stanley's father from the author, when he had briefly lodged at a nearby farmhouse.
"So who breaks into a house, takes nothing, reads a few books and leaves?"
asked Doris in a fretful tone. Turning to look up at her with a face now more irritated than confused, Abel huffed, "I don't know, woman. What's it matter anyhow? They ain't taking nothing. Pigs are in their pen. Maybe it was just the young lad from farm over yonder, snooping around in his boredom. I don't care right now. I wants a glass of milk in me bed." Doris sighed loudly and deliberately, so that Abel might acknowledge her discomfort at the circumstances, But, given that she'd also just travelled a fair distance in the wake of a cider binge, she too longed for the comfort of her bed. They shut the front door, filled their mugs with milk, took some scraps of stale bread, and slinked off to their bedroom. They rose the next morning at the rooster's crow, perhaps better rested and ready for the day than they had been in some time, given that no alcohol had been consumed for over a day. They dressed, albeit at a rather leisurely pace, and headed downstairs. To their disbelief, the front door was once again wide open, and more books were laid out upon the table.
"That's it!" Doris fumed. "Abe, you get over to that rotter's farm and tell him his boy ain't come within 100 yards of our place or you shoot him."
"I'll do better than that," replied Abel with a menacing grin. "I'll give that boy such an hiding that he won't walk for a week. That'll teach him to come sneaking in our house." It was at that moment that a most peculiar sound emanated from the doorway. It sounded much like someone clearing their throat, as one does when attempting to get the attention of another, but with a distinctive throatiness about it that felt more animal than human, almost like the grunt of a pig. Abel and Doris spun around. Doris shrieked and leaped backwards, almost tripping over Abel in the process, who was frozen in horror. There, in the doorway, stood a pig. And when I say stood, I really do mean stood, on his hind legs, back straight, like you or I, and most certainly not like a pig.
"I'm sorry to startle you,"
it spoke in a voice that can be best described as a slightly raspy tenor with impeccable diction. Doris screamed, a cry so shrill that it could shatter glass and cause dogs to howl.
"It's the devil!" she cried. "The beast of cloven hoof, come to take our souls. I told you this would happen if we didn't go back to church and change our ways. Oh, Lord, have mercy upon us." The pig gave a quizzical look, or at least as quizzical as a pig can look, given the difference in head shape to you or I.
"Whatever do you mean?"
it responded.
"I mean you no harm. I merely came to extend my gratitude for your hospitality."
Doris gripped Abel's arm so tightly he yelped, and shaken from his immobile stupor, he cleared his throat. What do you mean?" He trembled, not a hint of his usual bluster. The burly loudmouth had been reduced to a meek, cowering ninny.
"Well, I can deduce from the vicinity of the pen to this farmhouse that you were responsible for my accommodation,"
the pig replied.
"and I ought to give thanks for food and shelter. I should think an apology is in order too, as you seem none too pleased by my intrusion into your humble abode. You see, each day since I came into this world, I would gaze through the window upon the many books adorning your shelves, and I felt compelled to see what they contained."
The Stanleys remained silent, dumbfounded by that to which they bore witness.
"So, I let myself in while you were away," the pig continued, "and set to consuming the contents of every page, figuratively speaking. Terribly sorry I left the door open. I haven't got quite the hang of door handles yet. I don't think they were designed with trotters in mind."
Abel began to ponder that it was all some hallucinogenic dream brought about by Bill Wormsley's homebrew. "Perhaps it's gone funny and given me a fever," he thought to himself. Doris, on the other hand, had suffered a rather strict religious upbringing and was convinced that the appearance of this creature was very real and the most dreadful of omens. Not daring to provoke the creature, she remained silent and awaited her fate.
"Anyhow, I've come to wish you farewell. As you can imagine, I've rather outgrown my current lodgings, and being as I don't seem to have an awful amount in common with my siblings, I'm going out into the world. One of your books spoke of a place east from here by the name of Oxford, a place of great minds as I understand it. I feel I'm more likely to find enlightenment there than... well, I needn't be unkind. I hope you don't mind, but I've helped myself to some scraps of bread for my journey and a rag to carry them in. Thank you, Stanleys. Ta-ta!"
And with that, the pig slung the bundle over his shoulder, turned and walked to the road. The Stanleys watched as the little pink figure got further and further away until it disappeared over the horizon. No sooner had the pig disappeared, the thoroughly perturbed Stanleys marched off to their local inn, the Merry Buzzard, seeking the comfort of a stiff drink. Normally they would make their presence known, whooping and guffawing as they drank their own body weight in whatever poured cheapest. But today, this was not the case. They sat in the far corner, not talking to each other, seemingly staring into nothingness as they drank until their nervous tremors were quelled. At about sundown, Bill Wormsley arrived and slammed a handful of coins on the bar.
"Just keep 'em coming, Ned," he exclaimed. "I'm so sick of my own stuff, I'll takes whatever you gives me."
Wormsley was a rather grotesque individual. He was missing all but a few of his poorly maintained teeth, and his personal hygiene rivaled that of the spotted hyena, which is doubly apt given his unmistakable laugh. He would often leer at the womenfolk of Rumplesnudgeon and chase them around, shouting things such as,
"Give us a kiss, you know you can't resist me charms,"
in his distinctively croaky, high-pitched voice. He spotted the Stanleys and was taken aback by their solemn demeanour. He shuffled over and plonked his drink down on the table.
"Who died? You two look ruddy miserable."
Abel looked up at his friend, the first time he'd shown any awareness of his surroundings all day.
"Leave off, Bill. I ain't in the mood."
"What's up, man?"
Bill pried.
"Bank finally come to take your farm? I told you not to go throwing away your earnings in here."
"You wouldn't believe me if I told you, so just drop it,"
Abel snapped, before taking a large swig of brandy.
"Here, Doris, what's his problem? I ain't never seen him like it,"
Bill asked, his brow beginning to furrow at the growing concern he felt for his friends. Doris didn't look up, nor address Bill at all, and began mumbling something vaguely prayer-like.
"Look, I ain't standing around here all night to be ignored,"
Bill chided.
"All right, keep your secrets."
Abel brought his fist down on the table with a thud and grit his teeth.
"Sit down, Bill, and keep your voice down."
He proceeded, in hushed voice, to tell of the inexplicable events of the past few days, of the break-in and the talking pig, of how it had all felt like a bad dream, but swearing blind to what he saw and heard. There was a pause. Bill looked at Abel, then at Doris, then back at Abel. He leant back in his chair, craned his neck, and let out an almighty laugh, one that seemed to emanate from the very pit of his stomach. He kept going for more than half a minute, the Stanleys' faces reddening as the other patrons began to turn toward the table, curious at the commotion. When Bill eventually stopped to breathe and wipe the tears from his cheeks, he gestured at the mortified couple.
"You absolute pair of pillocks," he jeered. "You had me going there. Thought there were actually something wrong."
Abel leant forward, desperate to keep their private conversation just that. Private.
"I ain't pulling your leg, Bill," he whispered. "It's the truth."
Well, as alcohol tends to loosen one's lips, I think it should come as no surprise that within an hour of this exchange, there wasn't a single person in Rumplesnudgeon that didn't know of the Stanleys' telling porkies, as Bill Wormsley had so aptly exclaimed. They had never had a particularly good reputation amongst their neighbours, but now, branded as drunken loons, they were shunned, even by those they had considered friends. They retreated to the farm in shame, abandoning any hope at a return to normalcy. It would be some time before anyone would see the Stanleys again.